Welcome to the Future Pulse podcast. We dive into the world of innovation and technology. My name is Melica, and I'm the founder of SkillTalks, which is a global tech recruitment company working with AI companies across the globe. Today, I have with me Ray Shu, who is the VP of Industrial AI Solutions Sales. Absolute pleasure to have you on here, Ray.
Thank you, Melica. A pleasure to be with you today.
Likewise. Well, Ray, you've spent quite a few years working at the intersection of industrial operations and AI. So, how would you describe what you're sort of personally focused on today?
Yeah, I think, just a little bit of background. I started with a very technical career, wrote a lot of software early in my career, but then really was attracted to how technology is applied to real world industry. And by chance, I've been connected a lot in the last few decades in working with manufacturers to apply technologies. And I think having been through a variety of trends like the dot-com trends and industrial IoT, big data, I think with the advent of generative AI and AI in general and the compute power and the storage that's available today, I think it's really opened the doors for manufacturers to gain a lot more business impact faster
Hmm.
and more accessible to not just the big manufacturers, but all the smaller manufacturers, mid-sized manufacturers out there. So
Very cool. Well, what sort of pulled you into this type of AI industry in the first place, industrial AI, and what kind of energizes you the most in this industry?
yeah, I think just when I visited my first manufacturing plant, I was just fascinated with, this whole concept of going from raw materials to finished goods and the things that we take for granted as a consumer.
Mm,
For example, just a jar of pickles. I
yeah.
visited a pickle factory. Raw materials are essentially cucumbers and all the chemicals and everything. Like I'm talking about millions of pounds of cucumbers a month gets processed. And the process of being able to cut them in the right shapes, the different products and the people and the machine that's involved with it is pretty fascinating to me. But beyond that, it's the supply chain behind it, right? So if you wanted just the vinegar, that's how that's then produced and provided to the pickle factory, or the jar. The process of manufacturing glass is super dirty
Mm,
manufacturing. Is very difficult to apply technology to, and then even down to the labeling. There are companies that produces millions of feet a month of printed marketing materials and brands. And just visiting all those factories as well throughout my career has given me a pretty good appreciation for what we see on the shelves and every day, and the complexity of the supply chain and the labor challenges that we have in our economy. So
it must have changed so much because I've actually got a client that they do a lot of thing with industrial automation, but even now, like they're putting in smart cameras sort of detect any sort of quality defects. But a few years ago that wouldn't have been a thing. So it's changed. It must have changed so much.
it has, and I think automation has done in a lot of manufacturing has getting you closer to less and less people, like just manual labor. But in a lot of industries, either it's very difficult and the environment's too variable and dangerous for sensors and automation to work properly. It's kind of a paradox. The more dangerous and dirty the environment, the more you want automation, but the
Mm,
harder it is actually to replace humans in those situations. But I am seeing like the transition of humans making the materials to machines making the materials, but then you need people to tend those machines and to
yeah.
move those materials and to like you said, to inspect them. But with vision now, you can automate that process. So there is a lot of automation, but the fact that you need a workforce to run these plants from the manufacturing line all the way up to the back office is still needed. And it's a challenge because I think, at least in the U.S., I know that the ability to attract new people into manufacturing careers is very difficult. So.
Mm. And then based on that, then, so you talked about the workforce challenge. Like, why do you think perhaps traditional management models may have not kept up with this increase in demand?
I think it's the same age old problem of just people communicating and
Mm,
and you know having those important conversations, and, whether in manufacturing and other industries, I think it's been pretty consistent that people leave their job because of their direct managers for the most part. And this is having those critical conversations about compensation, about company vision, about, just feeling like your manager cares about your well-being. So those
Yeah.
types of things are still consistent. And I think having frontline managers and shift managers that are well trained in this areas, it's proven in studies that the best frontline managers have lower turnover rate, which is
Right.
super expensive for manufacturing. I think the latest studies say like the turnover rate for manufacturing industry is about 26%. So 1 in 4 people that you've trained will likely leave in a year, which is much higher than industry standards.
Yeah, no, that is. And when we spoke last week, you talked about the work you did with a major restaurant chain. Then you mentioned AI coaching. Perhaps tell our audience what that means in terms of the AI coaching model, and actually what drew you personally to that project as well.
Yeah, it's actually a project from one of our experts, Marcelo, that I work with. He had a relationship with a leading psychologist, Dr. David Yeager, here at the University of Texas at Austin. He wrote a book called 10 to 25, which Marcelo really enjoyed. It was about the science of managing young people and motivating young people. And so the what attracted me to the concept that they came up with is, how do you take the concept of this book and leverage technologies like generative AI to bring this to managers at scale, right?
Mm,
So one of the industries that really wanted to try this out was a major fast food restaurant here in the US. If you think about fast food, it's just fast manufacturing. You have people,
yeah.
you get orders, you have to make the food, and then you deliver it to the window. So it's just fast turnaround manufacturing. But what attracted me was the concept of taking the concepts of that book and training a large language model to understand the concepts in that book, taking the culture documents of that organization, the restaurant chain, and also combining that into the large language model. And finally, interviewing the top 25 best managers and how they have conversations, and training that large language model, and going through user testing, A/B testing between what ChatGPT might say to the same answers, and going through that process. I was skeptical in the impact that it would make, but what we found over the last year is that just anecdotes of managers, employees having a much better experience. The amount of times that employees now call in sick or not show up to work that same day has significantly
Mm,
reduced. And so if you look at some of the questions, the questions you ask, like, hey, why my employees are coming in late, what should I do? It's a lot about starting with learning why somebody is late and listening to what might be their challenges, right? And part of the answer is pause and listen, and then also coaching them to say how being on time is critical for the team's performance. So things like that day to day you may not think about as you start managing more people. This
mm.
AI coach just helps remind managers how to have those critical conversations. And by doing it at scale, it is reducing turnover. And so it really, I think, to me, in manufacturing, I think you have the same challenges.
Yeah.
And so much talk is about AI taking jobs and replacing certain jobs, but I think this one, I was really attracted to it because it's really about amplifying the workforce, helping amplify human relationships, and help people be more effective at their jobs.
But how can you kind of convert those human challenges into something that AI can actually help with? Because again, I know you said it can't be replaced, but I suppose the difficulty that you might have is, how do you make sure it doesn't sound like a chatbot and you're tailoring it like ChatGPT so it actually feels like an actual coach?
Right. And I think that's the part where all the A/B testing
Yeah.
has really helped us like tailor it to where it's not based on answers from ChatGPT. It's based on something that's very specific to a philosophy from a leading psychologist. So imagining every employee has a leading psychologist and their philosophies on how to manage and motivate young people in their pocket. So it's delivered on a mobile phone, but also it's tailored specifically to the company's culture and the best practices of the managers, because every company will be different and have different
Mm.
situations. In the restaurant chain, maybe a lot of customer complaints. In a manufacturing plant, potentially, lots of lots of challenges working in a difficult and environment and with heavy machinery. So having that being tailored is what is going to gain the adoption. That's the hypothesis. Is not just general chat gpt responses, but something that's very tailored to that company and that employee.
And then you've seen managers ask the AI coach about pay raises, tough conversations, or even like conflict. So, what does that sort of tell you about today's leaders and what they need?
I think one of the common things, and there's plenty of great leaders, but I think one of the common things even great leaders sometimes forget is really taking time to have those critical conversations.
Mm,
One of the biggest thing is actually not having those critical conversations and just focus on the data, especially when when you're managing one or two people, but then when you have 30, 40 people in your team, I think making sure that you're reminded that each of the employees really value those critical conversations, and having a coach to kind of guide you and remind you to be at your best during those situations. I think that's the key. And we often as humans tend to forget, but having a coach that is reminding you of that, I think will make those little conversations make a big difference.
and what have you sort of learned from the employee side where they've kind of responded to that sort of support?
I think we're still gathering anecdotes, and I think we have some stories where they are more not just they're just more engaged in the job because they feel like they're more motivated, right? And this comes from
Yeah.
the studies in the Dr. Yeager's book, is how to motivate young people. And so we are seeing changes in behavior in terms of how the employees are more on time and more engaged and take pride in their work, but also a significant improvement in customer satisfaction.
Yeah. So just talking about your perception of AI, because I ask everyone this, but what is your personal prediction for how AI will reshape frontline work over the next few years?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's moving so fast, and this idea of general intelligence, we're racing to that. My personal thinking is that we are moving fast, but it's going to get there long. Just thinking of the past trends, it'll get there longer than we think, and the impact of it will be unexpected. But today, I think manufacturers and organizations we believe, need to lean in on it versus being afraid of it.
Mm,
Obviously you have to be careful, but because that is really mimicking human intelligence, the possibilities of what it could do is pretty limitless, right?
yeah.
And so it's hard to, I mean, it's hard for me to predict, but what I'm seeing, at least in the manufacturing space, is we talk about frontline workforce, but the back office. So if you think about going from raw materials to finished good, that whole process, using AI to help predict how much you need to produce, how much you need to buy, and optimizing that whole process, I think has historically been done through tribal knowledge and spreadsheets and lots of communications. I think that is an area I think in the immediate future can pay big dividends and profitability for businesses in manufacturing.
Good stuff. And last but not least, what's one misconception about AI in the workforce that you're constantly trying to correct for people?
that that using ChatGPT or Copilot is a magic bullet to solve all problems. I think you get lots of success early on. It's kind of gives you really good results, but when you get into more complicated business problems, you need more experts. You need people and partners to help you implement those types of solutions. So yeah, what I see is like the perception that is a magic bullet, particularly from higher level executives, but there is still work to be done to effectively implement AI solutions.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, where it was a good conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Malika. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.